This is inspired by Enei, Widowed. All right, so a few people asked me to do an inspired by Enei and particularly Widowed. So I created a short demo track inspired by Widowed and other Enei tracks that I've been listening to. Let's have a listen to that and then I'll show you how I made it. Okay, so this is my little demo track inspired by Widowed. Let's check it out. Cool. So I think I got reasonably close to the style, and let's have a look at what's going on. The main drums are just a loop that I put together a month or two ago. And I noticed that the kick just needed some extra oomph, so I added another kick layer. This second kick is just a pretty electronic sounding kick, and it meshes well with the break kind of sounding kick. There's not even an EQ to make them blend, they just happen to work nicely together. So in the intro, I just cut out the individual kicks and don't have any of the rest of the loop playing. So it sounds really sparse, but when the rest of the loop comes in, it fills it out perfectly because they're all designed to go together. In order to make the initial snare sound quite different, I used a completely different snare. I just grabbed a sample from somewhere and it's already got plenty of reverb on it, which suits the style. And then I wanted some additional kind of percussive elements. So I grabbed some rides and I reversed this one and left this one facing forwards, but faded it early so it kind of leads back into the second reversed. And then I made this little glitched up section by just time stretching some rides to make weird metallic noises and then sequenced up tiny little chops of them. I've already bounced it, but what I did was I used the beats mode and the envelope on that and just dragged it in to like kind of sharpen the sound. You can see they've got all pretty sharp envelopes to them. And that just creates a little like interesting thing at the end of each second bar. And that's pretty much it for the percussion in the intro. I've also got these reverb tails. And so this one just has the bottom taken off it and has some filters which you use towards the end of the tune. And I've got this one over here, which is a lot more full because I haven't taken out the bottom end. And the way that I made those reverb tails was to use a reverb with freeze. And so if you hit the freeze button on a reverb when it is reverbing, it will hold that reverb forever. So I created a spare channel to create these reverbs, and I just played the snare and then froze the reverb. So when you hit the freeze button, it will stay playing that reverb forever. It will kind of just regenerate and regenerate and regenerate. So you can see that I automated the freeze button here, and then I held the button down for about 20 seconds. So that I got a nice long reverb tail that I could use as an atmosphere in the back of this tune. And I did that then with a couple of different samples. I think I've moved them around. So I think I made 4 or 5 different reverb tails just by using frozen reverbs off different samples. So you can see I made a few different reverbs. So a frozen reverb is a really interesting way to just get some background atmospheres going on. I'm pretty sure that that's how people get those long sustained non-tonal reverbs going on. We're going to talk about, before we do the basses, this crash, which is just a standard old crash with the transient faded out so that it's not too present, and then using reverb and delay to really shove it into the background of the track. And also the delay and the reverb help it sustain a lot longer. The original sample truncates way too harshly for that kind of flowing background atmosphere thing that we need to happen. Now for the vocal, I knew I needed some sort of vocal element because that's a really common feature of Enei tracks, is there's usually a vocal doing some dub delay type stuff. So I just grabbed a Vengeance sample, I think it is. And there's a chorus on it just so that it's a little bit different, a little bit non-standard. And then a dub delay. Now I've had this dub delay up on my website for download for years, and I literally dragged it in and then adjusted the time delay up. It's actually a pretty complex effect. I'm not sure if we should go through it now, but let's do it. I use these gates to kind of route audio into this channel, and then I filter it. And the tricky thing is that I also use a gate after that to grab the audio and feed it into a delay. Then there's a dry channel, which isn't delayed at all. So essentially we have a dry channel, which just passes through unaffected. And then we've got a delay channel, which it delays. And we've got a wet channel, which is filtered. And the interesting thing here is that the wet channel is then put through the delay again, and then it's processed again, and then put through the delay, and then processed again. This is a classic dub delay kind of effect. So if you put like high resonance on these things, and then you put a signal through it, you heard how the filter resonance pushed it up and up and up and up. It eventually gets limited, I think, by something in the processing here. Oh yeah, this saturator is clipping it and controlling levels, stopping it from going over unity. But you can get some really interesting, broken up, messed up sounds with a good dub delay. I wanted one, so I made my own a couple of years ago, and I use this pretty frequently for just processing things in that weird dub delay kind of effect. You've got different options in here. Let's not go into them too much. But that does make the vocal just decay out in a really interesting way. There's a slightly different vocal sample in the build here. Okay, so let's get on to the bit everyone wants to know about, the basses. Initially, all that we hear is a reverse reverb of the main bass. It's literally a reverb. Again, it's just to create that spatial whoosh through the build so that we know something's coming. So we'll get rid of that track because I'm not going to cover it any further. So the sub channel is just Serum, and it's using one oscillator, and I've just drawn in harmonics in here. So probably I've drawn in this one and a little bit of this, maybe a little more, something like that, I think. So it's not very complicated at all. Yeah, it's seriously just a matter of taste. I knew that I would want some really low harmonics and that the other sounds would more than make up for anything that was lacking beyond 100 hertz. So yeah, that sub channel is pretty straightforward. It just sounds like this. And it's just sustained through this whole first bar and then doesn't happen in the second bar. So this main sound is kind of the key to the track. And you'd actually be surprised to know that it's the same patch making the long distorted noise as it is making the short plucky noise. And the reason for that is that I felt like that's probably how Enei gets those tones. I can hear in a lot of his sound design, he's probably actually producing fairly simple tones out of a synthesizer, processing them in distortions and filters and so on to get interesting movements, and then creates samples and then works with samples in his tracks. So I wanted to follow the same kind of process to get similarly complex sounds myself. So what I did was I used a sample from my Neuro Reese's sample pack. It's really easy to make similar Neuro Reese's. The main thing there is that I've used sawtooths, I've distorted them, saturated them, and then limited, if not clipped them to get them as loud as they can be. The sample I used was sample 19. Let's find it. So it's certainly growly and distorted, but I've done some processing so that it sounds quite different to that. So I'll step through each of these effects and we'll listen to the sound change as we go. So I've used the filter in the Simpler, which certainly sounds crunchy. It's got some nice texture to it. You see the automation for the cutoff comes down and then back up to create like a bit of a pluck at the start, and the resonance just increases over time. We've also got a notch filter, which is LFOing just a tiny bit to create a bit more movement. In here, it's sort of creating a bit of a wobble. There's a chorus, which I don't think is doing too much. I mean, it's noticeable, but it's not super important. There's an overdrive just to crunch up the low mids again. So you can hear that that's quite pronounced and giving an extra sort of ripping tone to it. There's a reverb, which I hope isn't too audible. It does wash it out a little bit, but not as washy as it's going to get in a minute. We OTT it and bring the gain up on the OTT. This kind of sucks up extra noise from the reverb and makes it extra apparent. And then the secret weapon of this sound is this grain delay here. You'll notice I've got no spray, I've got the frequency set quite low, and the pitch is set to +12, which means it's going to pitch up each delay by an octave. The feedback's quite high, and the dry wet is automated so that it goes from low to high across the sound. So initially the sound is quite dry, and then by the end it's fully coated in this grain delay. So in here it adds extra movement, and you'll notice I've got the time on 50 millisecond rather than on sync. I just find that when I'm using grain delay like this as a pitch shifter, it's better to set the time parameter manually than to have it be tempo synced, because we're not trying to create a delay effect, we're trying to create an actual sound design effect. I then have this utility on the end which just switches on and mutes any tails, because the reverb and the grain delay create quite a tail. Let's have a listen. And we don't want that additional da-da-da to be at the end of each bass hit. So that's essentially it for the main sound. It's essentially a very distorted Reese with some additional taste processing, like notch and overdrives and reverb. And the grain delay is what really fleshes it out and gives it that extra huge character. Because each time the sound is delayed and pitch shifted up, it creates another octave copy of itself. So it gets quite high and shrill by the end of it. It sounds really great in contexts like this, where you're trying to create a full spectrum sound that just gets huge really easily. So to create the second bass, I've taken the same channel and I've duplicated it entirely. I've gotten rid of the grain delay and I've created an EQ curve just to clean things up a bit. So we're getting rid of some muck at the bottom, getting rid of some of the tops and ducking some of the mids. And in the simpler, I'm using the amplitude envelope to be reasonably short and plucky with no sustain, and the filter envelope, again, short and plucky with a low pass filter. And then it's just repeating a note, and the interplay with the drums and that short stabby sound sounds really great. All right, that was inspired by Enei Widowed. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.